to quit playing politics here, and that's what this is.
Parents making their voices heard after the Howell School Board proposed controversial curriculum decisions. Those changes include banning classroom discussions on gender identity and limiting what literature will be allowed in schools. Our John Kipper joining us live tonight with the latest from tonight's rally. John, what were you able to find?
Well, Sam, the board meeting wrapped up just about an hour ago, and quite frankly, the board heard from a lot of opponents to the proposed policy, with just one person speaking in favor. And in fact, even conservative board members acknowledge that while they may generally agree with some of these policies, revisions can be made. Now, one of those proposed policies deals with gender identity in the classroom, specifically barring teachers from talking about gender identity with students. Another would put the board in control of what books are going into classrooms and libraries, with a series of restrictions on profanity, violence, sexuality, and drug use. The only way to get a book approved that include those topics would be a waiver. Now, opponents say those policies would put LGBTQ kids in bad positions, removing safe spaces for them, with others saying American classics like Of Mice and Men and popular book series like Hunger Games could be banned for all students. Now, we tried to speak with 4 different conservative voices attending the meeting. All declined, but one said they want to better understand the policies before speaking publicly, also saying they want the board to focus on education, not activism. But one of the opponents of the conservative board, Becky Hormuth, who also has a trans son, fears if these policies are passed as is, they could damage students.
I think that is an extreme measure that they're trying to do. They're politically having an agenda to control and micromanage every aspect that we deal with within our lives.
Now, I did try to speak with President of the board, Adam Bertrand, who proposed one of these policies, but in fact, I was barred from speaking to any of the board members by communication staff here. Bertrand did say publicly that changes may be made to some of these policies, and possible votes are coming next month. Reporting live in O'Fallon, John Kipper, First Alert 4.
A story will continue to track. John, thank you. A new